Hey guys, all right. So today we're finishing up solving quadratics, and our original aim was how do we solve quadratic equations using different methods other than factoring. And back in the day, we talked about completing the square, and I did mention one other one, which was called the quadratic formula. So today we're going to explore the quadratic formula, and then we will look at it a little bit more in the future and kind of attack it in different ways, okay? So today we're going to need the packet that's posted on the classroom, paper to take notes, and a pen and calculator. I'll let you know when we have to start taking notes today. It's a lesson where, again, you have to follow it step-by-step instruction and be an active participant in order to truly understand the process. All right. So we are now going to learn the last method, which is complete the quadratic formula. And now we have three different ways of solving quadratics. We can factor it, we can complete the square, or we could use the quadratic formula. It depends on what you like, or actually sometimes you can't factor it, so you might have to use completing the square or the quadratic formula. So sometimes they'll designate you have to use a specific process, but otherwise you can use whatever you want. All right, so how do we use the quadratic formula to find the solutions to a quadratic? Well, first you just need to be able to find your A, B, and C, because a formula is all about plugging and chugging, plugging into an equation or a formula and then chugging out numbers. So when we get, where do we get the numbers A, B, and C from? It's in that general quadratic, ax squared plus bx plus c. The a is the number in front of x squared, the b is the number in front of x, and the c is your constant. But just recognize that it has to be set equal to 0. So once we locate those numbers, we just plug them into the formula. We're going to try one together, but before we do that, I really want to explore one thing. Those are the steps that we're going to follow. But the first one, setting equal to 0, is an extremely important skills, just like when we were factoring. So I want to make sure you guys have it in the right spot. So you also want to make sure your equation's in standard form, which means descending order, which means highest exponent to lowest exponent. So for example, if you have 3x squared minus 8 equals 4x, you need to make sure it's set equal to 0. So in order to do that, you have to remember to bring the 4x over, but there are no like terms on the other side. So you cross off the 4x and you're going to rewrite it as 3x squared minus 4x minus 8. So you have to make sure you rewrite it in descending order. That's a really big skill that you're going to need for today. So the one that we're going to practice together today is solving 2x squared plus x minus 5 equals 0 using the quadratic formula. So the steps that we have labeled down the paper are: step 1, make sure it's set equal to 0, which it is. Step 2, we need to label our A, B, and C. So what that means is on the side of the paper, you're going to write A equals, B equals, and C equals. So make sure you pause the video to get this down. The A is the number in front of x squared, so that's 2. We don't bring the x squared with it, just the coefficient. The number in front of x is our b, but you'll notice there isn't a number there. It's an imaginary, or invisible, I should say, invisible number, which is 1. So our b is 1. And then our c is the constant. But don't forget, because this is a negative number, we have to bring the negative sign with it. The other two were positive, so I didn't really worry about that. So now that we have A, B, and C labeled, we want to write out our formula. Our formula is on the top of the page, and each time you do it, you're going to want to write it down so you memorize it, is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, that whole thing over 2a. Now, step 4 says something, write the skeletal framework. Well, what I mean by the skeletal framework is every time you see a variable, you're going to replace it with a parenthesis. Now, this is to avoid mistakes. A lot of people make mistakes when replacing or substituting the numbers in, so I like to show you what I do so it makes it a foolproof method. So every time I see a variable, I'm going to replace it with parentheses. So if you notice, I have negative parenthesis plus minus the square root. Now I'm going to put a parenthesis squared minus 4a parenthesis, another parenthesis, all over 2 parentheses. So that's a skeletal framework. You're going to just replace all those variables with parentheses, open parentheses, because we're going to fill them in a minute. So pause the video and make sure you get this down exactly the way I wrote it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fill in the appropriate numbers. So that's step 5. So if you look at the first number, it's B. So the number in the B spot in our little key over here is 1. So I'm going to replace B with 1. Now the next number that we have to replace is again for B again. So I'm going to put a 1 in there. Minus 4. Now what comes after 4 is A. The A that we said was 2. So I'm going to put 2 in there. And then C is negative 5 according to our key. And then on the bottom we have 2A. So A I'm going to replace with 2. Okay, so pause the video and make sure you get this down. Step 6 says calculate the 3 spots. The 3 spots are here in pink. We are going to put each of those into our calculator. So if you notice though, I did not circle the square root sign. It's very important because sometimes we're going to have to leave our answer in simplest radical form. If you put the radical in your calculator when calculating these spots, you're going to end up doing it wrong. Okay, so what we're going to do first is in our calculator, now I'm going to get this up. You'll notice it says negative parenthesis 1 parenthesis. So I'm going to type it as exactly as written. Negative parenthesis 1 parenthesis. Press enter and you get negative 1. So that's what I'm going to put in that spot. Plus or minus, keep that radical symbol. Now I'm going to calculate the next spot, which is all under the radical. Plug it in exactly as written. So it's parenthesis 1, close parenthesis, little 2 squared sign, which is x squared, minus sign, not negative, minus 4, parenthesis, 2, close it, open it, negative 5, parenthesis. So it's very important that you're using a minus next to a 4 and a negative for the 5. Press enter, you get 41. So that's the number that should be going under the radical. Last step is calculating the bottom spot, the 2 parenthesis 2, which is 2 times 2, which I'm sure you guys all know is 4. Oops. But it's really important that you know how to plug all this in your calculator because this will make or break your quadratic formula. So I get 4, so I'm going to plug that in the bottom, okay? So that's really important, knowing how to plug that into your calculator. The last step is separate your plus and minus just like we did with completing the square. You're going to do negative 1 plus radical 41 over 4. And the next one's going to be x equals negative 1 minus radical 41 over 4. Now, step 8 is make sure you evaluate according to the instructions. And I'm just going to tell you today, we're going to do it rounding to the nearest hundredth because getting it in your calculator, again, is really important. So what we're going to do is we're going to use alpha y equals in our calculator number 1. And in the numerator, it's negative 1 plus second x squared to get your radical sign, 41. Now I'm going to push the down arrow to get to my denominator, 4, enter. So everybody make sure you get this on your calculator. If you don't, please retry it. Now rounded to the nearest hundredth would be, oops, you can't see it because I got that blocking it, should be x equals 1.35. Okay, now we're going to do the next one. Now, if you want, I'm just going to copy and paste my entry so I don't have to worry about it. So you go up and highlight it. You press enter. You go over. Just change that to a minus sign. Not a negative, a minus, and press enter. You get negative 1.8507. Again, make sure you get that down. And then rounded to the nearest hundredth would be x equals negative 1.85. Okay? So this is how we use the quadratic formula. It's a process, just like completing the square was. So I'm going to ask you guys to try the next two on your own, then check your answers with the key provided in the Google Classroom. If you got any wrong, watch the second video where I guide you through both examples. Last, I want you to send me pictures of the 2 classwork problems, not the try these. Showing me only answers will result in a 0, okay? Remember, you could do it on any sort of paper you want. Write out the examples and work them out for me. Make sure you get that formula down each time though, okay? Good luck.